I am an African.
As a Zambian speaking from a previously British colonized country, I will remember my history for sure, but at the end of the day, we're all human, and so I do empathize with the loss of a mother, the loss of a grandmother, the loss of an aunt, the loss of a sister, because at the end of the day, we're all going to leave this world, and so on that level, everyone should be able to be empathetic. But I will also not pretend as though it affects me directly, at least right now. It may eventually through the economy, through the politics, but this is not someone I knew personally. This is someone that was painted differently in my history books. And so out of respect, yes, I, recognize the current events going on, but I'm not going to go out of my way and post, oh, Elizabeth, oh, Lizzie, oh, Queen Lizzie. Like, I don't expect that.
Hi, my name is Yabongulube from Zambia. And what I think about the Queen and Africa, one of my favorite photos of Queen Elizabeth was her dance with Kwame Nkrumah. It's just representative of her reign. Even as African countries gained independence, she took it gracefully. And also noted is her work through the Commonwealth, which impacted so many African countries. Although some may argue about the colonialism factor, but I mostly remember her for the UK aid, the trips to different African countries. I think she visited over 20 African countries, and her work through the Commonwealth. I think that can be it.
This is Umayyad from Togo in France. The relationship between the Queen and Africa is a fascinating one to me. On the one hand, she is the ultimate emblem of colonialism and everything that it stands for, and capitalism, and a lot of what is wrong with Africa and the world and the rest of the world today, or in the global south mainly. But at the same time, when we think about context, like I was speaking to my mom about it, for example, and those were their celebrities. The way that people are obsessed with the Kardashians, or, people who you follow when they give birth, when they have weddings, that accessibility without social media was only given to certain people, and those kinds of people were mainly the Queen. So when I was discussing this with my mom, she was like, oh, I just like the glitz and the glamour and the outfits, but I'm aware of the fact that she's a thief. And so people are able to kind of make space for both of those experiences at the same time. But I think culturally we've gotten to a point, we saw it with Black Lives Matter, we've seen it with other movements, where we're trying to consume ethically and intentionally. So now it's becoming less and less socially acceptable to say, oh, I support the monarchy, but I hate the horrible things that they've done. The same way it doesn't really make sense to be like, oh, I'm a carnivore, but I believe in sustainability. It just doesn't really go hand in hand. So I think the relationship is one that's very strange. My personal country of Togo just joined the Commonwealth in 2002, like about 2 months ago, which you'd think like people are leaving the Commonwealth. Why would Togo be joining? But clearly they see some kind of value in that. I think that the full history needs to be taught more, both across African schools and European schools.
First of all, rest in peace to the Queen. What happened to her was unfortunate, and I extend my condolences to her and her family. But then again, there was a lot of controversy revolving around her life to stop certain injustices and to stop the colonial and racial and settler injustices which she continued to benefit from. So, for example, from the 1950s to the 60s, There were concentration camps and settler establishments in Kenya, and then there was a blockade that led to the death of over 2 million Biafran citizens in 1967. And in 1970, there was an operation called Operation Legacy that involved destroying records of the British Empire's crimes. And in 2003, there was an invasion of Iraq that left 1 million people murdered. Also, she was the political head, as we know, of the Commonwealth, heading over 14 nations out of the UK. So I cannot tell why people say she had no involvement in politics when clearly there is some form of involvement, directly or indirectly. So for me, what I can say is the Queen has done some horrible things, but also those things deserve to be put in the light just as much as the good deeds that she has done. My only issue is that as the news goes around and as I'm seeing on social networks, most of the narratives that she was completely good and she's painted as being a saint, when all these other evils I just mentioned aren't getting much light. So that is my issue. But rest in peace to the Queen.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Africa for Dummies. Here today, it's just me, Nathan. Unfortunately, Zenge is a bit under the weather, so we wish him good health and everything. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Please make sure to hit the notification bell on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and continue to follow us on all social media platforms, and where you can interact with us and continue to give us some topics to discuss about and other things. So just want to say thank you to everyone that's listening for joining us. Today we have a interesting topic because it's just recent. The Queen of England had passed away. We, as Africa for Dummies, we offer our sincere condolences to the royal family and the British people. We noticed, unfortunately, we noticed the diversity in opinions when the Queen had passed, and on one side you had people, sad that the Queen had died, recognizing some of the positive impact that she had caused on the African continent, whereas on the other side you had people, blaming, or should I say, stating some of the things that the royal family or even the British Empire and state putting it on the Queen, to the extent that some people were actually celebrating her death. So we just wanted to discuss where this difference of opinion comes from and how we as Africans should look at the royal family, the crown, and things like that, because many African countries are part of the Commonwealth. So to do this, we reached out to an expert, Dr. Weston K Shilaho, who's a senior research fellow in African diplomacy and foreign policy at the University of Johannesburg. He's also the author of a book called Political Power and Tribalism in Kenya. And we're very, very happy to have him on our show. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Shilaho.
Pleasure, Nathan. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I guess the first question would be, why do you think there's such a huge divide in opinions over the royal family? You have people being, recognizing some of the things that she's done on the African continent, whereas to be honest, I think some of the things that people are putting on her particularly a bit unfair, because some of the things it's other people in the royal family that have done, or maybe something that the British country has done, but they're all now being thrown on Queen Elizabeth II. So where do you think this all stems from?
Nathan, it's expected that there'll be polarization vis-a-vis the death of the Queen, precisely because of what she symbolized. It's not so much about her person, it's about the institution of the royal family, the British royal family, what it symbolizes. And she was at the apex of that institution. And that institution is associated with a fairly sordid history in Africa and other parts of the world. When you're talking about conquest of other territories, when we're talking about imperialism and what that means, subjugation of indigenous cultures, if you are talking about exploitation of natural resources, if you're talking about the separation of indigenous knowledges, if you're talking about neocolonialism, I mean, some of these places, in fact, all of them, you may talk about their sovereignty, you may talk about their flag independence, but are they really free? People resident in those former British colonies are still complaining about neocolonialism. They have got individuals in power who still perpetrate practices, mindset, and ideologies of colonialists, much as they are not around. The slave trade, if you're talking about slave trade, that kind of history, you cannot just wish it away. People still feel the pain generations down the line. And therefore, cumulatively, Nathan, all these things are bound to arise, are bound to feature at this moment. There can never be any other moment other than such a moment of the demise of the Queen as the head before she passed on of the British royal family and what that symbolizes. Of course, there are those who are contesting, the position of those who are more critical of this history and the role the British family has played in other territories, and they would want everybody else to, join in mourning and forget about the past, if you like. I think it's their position, but what we ought not to do is to succumb to amnesia, is to institutionalize amnesia, is to institutionalize revisionism, because going forward, societies that tend to whitewash history, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how painful it is, are doomed to repeat that history. So those who are raising these questions, Nathan, they mean well for their societies and the world. And then those who would rather that history is not invoked, I don't think they're being honest with themselves. So it's not an attack on the Queen as a person or what she was. It's an engagement with a fairly complex history, and which, for most part, was painful to most people who are colonized by the British, and that pain is still here even as we speak now.
Yeah, certainly, and you can definitely see it in some of the comments that people are making. Maybe we'll add some into the video here, but some people I've used this as an opportunity to kind of look at, it's kind of generated those questions again of why are we as Africans still, looking at the royal family? Why are we as Africans still, um, still, why do we still pay respect and all these things to these people that have, as you said, they represent, it's not her particularly, but they haven't done any good for us. So, you still see, for example, if I'm not mistaken, most likely the leaders are going to pay their respects, all the leaders of the Commonwealth, even African countries and things like that, going to the Commonwealth and all these things. So it's a question of why are we still linked to the people that caused us all these problems.
Nathan, I don't think it's a simple answer to that question. It's a question that is central to our socioeconomic and political malaise in Africa. So if you can find the answer to that question, then you resolve almost all our problems in Africa, I dare
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
So one thing, some societies, like where I come from in Kenya, we do not have royal families in Kenya.
Yeah.
There was one ethnic group of all Kenyans, 40 odd ethnic groups that historically had a monarchy, but that monarchy has faded away.
Yeah.
It's a dead shadow of what it was before. No one even recognizes it, except for immediate family members, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's alien. That form of political organization is alien in my country, Kenya. And I would imagine in some other parts of the continent, and those other parts of the continent that still are organized, along, monarchical political systems. So it may be that, Africans who come from ethnic groups that have that form of political system, they're monarchical, would relate to the British monarchy. Would relate to it and would want to not to be drawn into the controversies about the painful history that the British monarchy is associated with. Fair. But the critical question, Nathan, is about decolonization. That process did not end with the lowering of the Union Jack in Kenya, in Nigeria, and former British colony. It didn't. It would be too simplistic to imagine that with the lowering of the Union Jack, raising.
For some people that don't know, the Union Jack is, of course, the British flag.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
Now that didn't mark the end of colony. We're still grappling with cultural colonialism, the need to liberate ourselves culturally, take pride in ourselves as Black people.
That is true.
The need to take pride in our forms of knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge systems. That epistemic decolonization. There's need for that. So in the absence of that, you may find this fairly problematic pronouncements by some Africans vis-a-vis the Commonwealth. They believe the Commonwealth is still relevant around. You ask them, what is the relevance of the Commonwealth? We're very critical of Francafrique, for instance.
Yes, yeah.
Francophonie in Africa. This very patronizing and paternalistic relationship between former French colonies and France. It's problematic. It's high time it changed.
Yeah.
So why do we think that the same kind of relationship doesn't obtain between the British and its former colonies? And as long as that relationship remains as it is, then you find this tendency of African leaders going out of their way to behave as if they're still appendages of the British Empire.
Yeah.
You get it. So those questions, Nathan, have a lot to do with what has transpired, what has happened since the colonialists left. And there's a lot of work to do
Very true.
to conscientize Africans, to restore their sense of pride, which colonialism eviscerated. Because if people are not careful, they may behave in a way that others would accuse them of celebrating their masters or their former colonial masters, if you like. That kind of thing. If you look on social media and other places, those kind of things are there. People are wondering, what are we doing? In my own country, Kenya, the immediate president, Uhuru Kenyatta, sent a message of condolences to the British royal family, and and announced 4 days of official mourning. And some Kenyans were asking, what 4 days?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Yeah.
So there was a huge debate about that. So I think it's the mental part that we're grappling with.
I see. Yeah, I mean, you say something that somebody that was, I forget unfortunately I've just forgotten the name of the person we had on the podcast previously. But he had stated something similar to what you had said, that he's a white German, and he basically stated that he grew up all his life in Namibia. He fought for the struggle from Namibia, and he had mentioned that the saddest thing in Africa is that the political systems that the colonialists had left are still being they're still going on right now, and the unfortunate thing is that they are being run by us now. So that's something similar that he had mentioned. But to the cultural colonialism part, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, because nowadays there seems to be this revival or thing. I don't know, maybe it's something that's driven by um I don't know what I can call it, but there's this thing of people wanting to, you know, sort of reclaim Africanness or something like that, where it's like you have Americans coming back to Africa now, like I think in Ghana mostly. You have people trying their best to really push for more African art in social media, and all these sorts of things. Um, my question would be, how do you think we can reclaim our culture, or have that um you know pride that you speak about in our culture? Because for me, growing up, I never really thought about it like that, because to be honest, when I was growing up, we grew up, I think, still in the British system. To be quite frank, in Zambia, you still everything from primary school to the whole system is still it's sort of this British system. So to me, it's like I'm just living life. I don't know if I'm doing and if I'm in a way rejecting my own culture. And sometimes when you see people, I know in the past, now it's kind of celebrated. It's people are starting to celebrate it, but I know in the past when you saw people doing things that were perhaps, there's a way that we look at people and call it maybe primitive and things like this, or whatever it is, maybe of certain people, maybe doing uh or people in the village, or people in certain areas. So my question would be, how do we reclaim that culture? How do we, as you say, have pride in our culture? In the last episode we discussed, we were talking with Unia about how there was a moment where we're talking about how we don't celebrate mud huts, but we celebrate these skyscrapers. Of course, there's sense to that, because it's quite, they're marvels in engineering, but when we look at our own architecture, we don't celebrate it. We look down on it, and we call it pretty much, look at it the same way that the British or the West looks at it. So the question is how long-winded question, but how do we reclaim that pride that you speak about?
Nathan, that's the $1 million question. Because it's the education system, Nathan. Drawing from your native country, Zambia.
Yeah.
And in Kenya, I would say the same. Somebody from Nigeria will say the same thing, or Uganda. Yeah, Nathan, it's the education system that remained intact in Africa. It alienates, Africans from themselves, from their cultures, from their various worldviews, from their belief systems, from their political systems. And that has been the case. So much so that it's almost Western standards, you've invoked the word primitive, the word primitive. It's used almost thoughtlessly to refer to things African and things Black. And even some of us who have gone to school, we fairly cavalierly invoke that word in reference to ourselves, because when you use the word to refer to things African, in effect, you are referring to yourself. So the challenge, Nathan, is how do you rejig education systems across Africa so that they're embedded in the catchment societies? You can look at East Asian countries, for instance. South Korea were colonized, and many other countries in that part of the world. But they never lost sight of the fact that they're different people. And they never lost sight of that. We can see it even among the Chinese. They are not ashamed of the fact that they're different. Despite having been mired in poverty not too long ago. China was a veritable third world country. But because of that belief that we're different, we do things differently. And if people are doing things better elsewhere, we can borrow from them. But we don't have to take the template. That's what we do in Africa. We take the template. We don't selectively borrow from elsewhere. And to change this system of dependency, Nathan, it has to take political leadership. And unfortunately, post-colonial African leadership is Eurocentric in outlook, embarrassingly so. It's Eurocentric. They love going shopping in New York, in Paris, in Brussels, in Washington. Spend a lot of money outside. Latest, they're going to Dubai. While the economies are tanking and they're underperforming, and they don't even relate. Capital flight, taking money outside of the continent, and how that contributes to underdevelopment and poverty. They cannot. So, Nathan, it has to begin from the education system, and that's difficult, because you'll be expecting people who are beneficiary of the colonial education system to change these education systems in Africa. It's not in their best interest to change. It's not. It's not. It serves them well. They go, they have studied abroad. They take their kids to study abroad. And when their kids come back, they load it over those who didn't study abroad. To the extent that in Africa nowadays, if you studied in Africa, it's taken that you didn't get good education. You're studying in Germany. Your colleague studying in Britain. I mean, by that very fact, you're taken to have gotten superior education. You talked about development, Nathan. Brick and mortar conceptualization of development is also a problem in Africa. The skyscrapers, railway lines. You may know about the debt trap diplomacy in Zambia, your country. In Kenya, many other countries. Because they borrow money and pump that money into vanity projects, because they want their cities to look like New York, look like London and whatever, and they think that's development. But no, culture is also part of development.
That's a good point.
Taking charge of culture, ensuring that people take pride in their cultures, and that they're not embarrassed to be who they are. That's development. Because if they're not embedded in their cultures, then they're susceptible to all sorts of ideas flying all over the place. They excel in mimicry and imitation, as opposed to being authentic, being true to themselves. And all these things, Nathan, there's nowhere. You ask me the question, how do we do that? Nathan, you can't realize these things other than through the education system. You can't. It's the education system that will empower people cognitively. So it's not that somebody wants to get a job after completing school. Somebody takes pride in themselves. And by taking pride in themselves, they also take pride in somebody who looks like them. But if that doesn't happen, somebody looks down upon themselves. They look down upon somebody who looks like them, a fellow Black person.
Very true.
And elevate somebody else, not on any other account, on the account that this person comes from a developed world, or this person is from, a country that previously colonized them. So those are challenges, Nathan. I don't have
Yeah.
easy answers to these questions.
Yeah.
And how I wish we held, candid conversations around those issues. And of course, with our political leaders and the elite in Africa generally, then collectively we can find, we can find a way out of this morass. It's a morass.
Yeah.
It's a morass.
Yeah. No, I certainly agree. I think that many African leaders are really trying to mimic things that they've seen outside instead of maybe getting the idea and seeing if it would work in their context and things like that. Because as you said, there's so many projects that have started and not yielded the results that they were supposed to, simply because they were designed in that way. But just to sort of go to the conclusion, how do you and bringing it back to the topic at hand, which is the queen and the royal family. Um, you mentioned that we need to not forget about the past, but we still need to move forward. So, how do we? Because this show is tailored towards African youth. How do you think that we, as the youth, should number one look at the crown or the royal family, and number two, how do you think we can move forward? How do we uh you know try and slowly get those things that you had mentioned before, for example, the cultural revival? How do we do those things as young people? Are they things that we can do? And also back to the first question, what do we so the first question would be how do we view the royal family and the British Empire? And the last question would be, how do we move forward, knowing that we're still linked to the British Empire?
Nathan, the other thing is that a people's history sticks with them for eternity, no matter how painful it is. So what we do not advocate is erasure. Because if we behave as if everything is hunky-dory, there are no problems. Former British colonies didn't have problems with the British Empire, British colonialists. It's all been good. The Commonwealth means well for former British colonies. It's erasure. That constitutes erasure. That constitutes amnesia, as I said earlier. That wouldn't be the way to go. The way to go is the crown, the British royal family, has had a lasting impact on many parts of the world, and specifically Africa. Because when you're talking about colonialism, Nathan, it's in Africa where colonialism had the deepest and enduring impact of all places. It's in Africa. Because colonialism basically destroyed the African person. Destroyed the African person. That's what it is. In its place, it left a miniature person who aspires to look like, their colonial master. And there can never be a more graphic tragedy than that. So I think youth must be appreciative of that. The crown is part of their history. African youth, particularly from former British colonies. And romanticism would not do.
Yeah.
Where we're looking at our history as if it was all good before the colonialists came. We had our own challenges. We did have our challenges.
Yes.
It wasn't all good. So romanticism would not do. But what I'm asking for is a critical appraisal of this history as young people. And they're not going to do it if they don't read. And if they don't read critically. And they're not going to be in a position to do it if they're not taught correct history, Nathan. You can teach people, but teach them wrong things.
Yeah.
Fela Kuti talks about teacher, don't teach me nonsense. He said there's possibility of young people also being taught wrong things, distorted history, revised history, whitewashed history. That won't do. And so therefore, they have to look for this knowledge by themselves and see the place of the crown in their history, but also acknowledge the pain, the atrocities that the crown is associated with. In my country, Kenya, the British are associated with a lot of atrocities in suppression of the Mau Mau freedom fighters. They set up a concentration camp in which massive human rights atrocities were committed, and many other freedom fighters across the country, and in other places where liberation was waged, through armed struggle. So youth can't forget, can't whitewash that history. They can't. But at the same time, they have to do business with the British government.
Yeah, that was going to be
society. It's a global world.
Yeah, that was going to be my other question as well, because I wanted to ask if we could do this in isolation.
No, we can't.
Yeah.
We can't. We cannot. To do business with them, there are things we need from them.
Oh, sorry. Could you just excuse me for 1 second? Sorry.
Okay. Yes. So I was saying, Nathan, we're not advocating a world where people, operate in silos, in isolation. That world is not there. But the world that we don't advocate, in the world where Africans take it as a given that they occupy the lowest rung on this ladder. That world is what we say young people should not internalize that kind of world, that they're like appendages to this global community. That Africa is a metaphor of inefficiency, of disease, of all that's bad. It's a desolate space. They should not countenance and internalize that. That's going forward. So we're going to engage you, former colonial masters. We're going to engage you, the developed world, but not as inferior partners. How I wish young people appreciated that. And that if there's technology that we're interested in, we can selectively borrow those kind of things. The East Asian countries and societies precisely did that.
China.
We can borrow Western technology, Western education, and embed it in our own unique cultures and heritages. And that kind of approach has propelled them forward. Propelled them forward. So young people should resist the temptation to look down upon themselves, their cultures and their heritages and their history, and they read and they inform themselves. The other question, moving forward, I think that's what it is. Moving forward, we will have to pay attention to scholarship in Africa. Because you may graduate so many students, you may talk about 85%, 90%, 95% literacy rates in various parts of the continent. But what kind of education are you talking about? If it's education where young people regurgitate things that really don't, transform their societies, education where young people don't ask critical questions about the place of Africa within the global system, and how the global system can actually, consign Africa to the margins, to the periphery. If they can't relate questions of poverty and inequalities in their midst, both internal factors and external factors, if they can't relate those things and connect those things going forward, it will be difficult to find lasting solutions and enduring solutions to African socioeconomic and political malaise. That's what I'm saying. And they must pile pressure on the political elite. The political elite do not act altruistically. They don't. If they feel the education systems in their countries do not meet their demands, aspirations, interests, they raise those questions. They do. So I think they can't be bystanders. In any case, they're the future of the continent, and Africa is the youngest continent of all continents. So these are the stakeholders. They're the stakeholders, and they can organize politically. There are many political formations across the continent, led by young people, mobilizing young people. Yeah, you mobilize. You mobilize on those things of culture, on those things of Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
That kind of things. And then by so doing, then you can transform the economy. Because often we look at the economy in isolation. The economy is underperforming. What is IMF, World Bank? What are they doing? China and what are no? It's about culture. It's about culture. Because if you have a political elite in a given country that is culturally dislocated, you go to China, you borrow money, you pump the money into consumerism. You go to the West, you borrow money, you splurge the money into consumerism.
Yeah.
Yes. Because there's no pride in yourself. But if there's pride, you can borrow the money and invest the money into production.
Yeah. No,
to transform people's lives and create. Nathan, what I was saying in conclusion is this. It's okay for young people and Africans some of them to be annoyed when they listen to some in the Middle East trying to engage in historical revisionism. But the critical question is they have to hold their political leaders to account. It's easier to hold their political leaders to account than to make any impact by throwing salvos at their British royal family. So that in their respective countries, if their political elite who perpetrate a colonial system, they must hold those people to account. They have to. People who think that their legitimacy is drawn from validation from external actors, validation by former colonial masters. Those kind of political elite are caught up in a time warp, and they're not going to transform their respective societies. And they have to mobilize against such people. People who don't engage the international financial system with the interests of their people at heart. You're going to borrow money, but to do what with the money you're borrowing from the Bretton Woods institutions? What do you want to use the money for? Yeah. Okay, you're going to China to borrow money. What do you want to do this? What do you want to, spend this money on? So they have to be very robust in demanding accountability from their political elite. And as scholars, you, myself, and other scholars, we owe it to ourselves to train students who take pride in themselves, not to train students who think that some other parts of the world represent excellence, sophistication, development, and therefore they have to aspire to be like those societies. They have to catch up. To them, development is a matter of catching up. No. We have to perish that thought. Because if that thought is not perished, then, Nathan, I don't think we're going to overcome the myriad challenges we confront in Africa on a daily basis. We won't. Because these challenges it's not about magic wand. It's just about recalibration of our thought processes. It's as simple as that. Recalibration of our thought processes. If we don't believe in ourselves, people will continue dying of prehistoric diseases like cholera and those kind of things. We're not going to overcome those things. Later on, even finding a vaccine to some pandemic like COVID-19 or some other pandemics that, God forbid, they're often. Later on that, people will continue suffering for no reason at all.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with what you've said. I think that we as young people definitely need to hold our leaders accountable. But I think that it's going to be a bit difficult, especially considering the reaction from said leaders when you try to hold them accountable sometimes, usually met with violence and things of that nature. So but I do think that That what you said is very true. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time. And just want to say thank you again, uh, Dr. Shalal, for joining us and really telling us, to really revive that African, spirit, and be proud of some of the things that we have as Africans, and not to just simply neglect them simply because you know the West deems them as quote unquote primitive. So I just say thank you on behalf of me and Zenge. Just say thank you so much for taking the time out to join us, and also thank you to our listeners for listening to this episode. And yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Shalal.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Zenge Okolide.
No, thank you very much.
Sincere appreciation for reaching out to me so that we have this conversation.